Let me share my 5 most expensive money mistakes with you so you can avoid them. If you're anything like me and you want to build wealth so that this financial part of your life is taken care of and you can enjoy your time, then you probably also don't want to waste your time and your money making the most common costly money mistakes that most people, including me, regret and that can throw you back decades. So they cost you time and they cost you money. So if you want to save that time and save thousands of dollars in the process, keep watching because I will go through 5 mistakes that I realized too late. And I wish I had known that sooner. If you're new here, I'm Sophia. I've been learning about personal finance and investing over more than a decade now. I also love to talk about money and building wealth and how we can build wealth without living frugal. And it starts with mistake number 1, and that is relying on others when investing. So at a time where I had already felt bad that I hadn't started to invest yet, I conveniently got a call from my local bank. They told me about this very flexible investment, where I earn this and this much percent no matter what, and I can also invest a part of that money so it makes me even more if the market goes well. And of course, you can withdraw that money all the time, and you can also put more into it if you want, and you can change the relation between the two anytime, and it sounded awesome. But as you can already guess, it was not. Because at some point I checked the fine print and this investment had cost me several $1,000s, which was a lot of money for me back then. And when I found out, I was really shocked, and I swore to never listen to someone else when it comes to investing again without having at least some clue of what they're talking about and of what I have to be careful of or where I have to look, like the fine print. Because especially those combination between, fixed percentage and flexible percentage and whatever, they usually have a lot of hidden costs. And I guess this doesn't even have to do with local banks, although they do have people who sell those types of products. But it can also be any type of financial advisor at some point. And there may even be situations where a financial advisor is helpful. It's just the more you know about the topic, the better. At least enough so you can ask the right questions. And for me, at some point, I had learned so much about investing that I was confident enough to do it all by myself. And this is what I do to this day. My mistake number 2 was missing a strong reason. So I remember when I was starting out, pretty much my only motivation was that I heard that investing was important. So I had books about financial freedom and also books from investors when I was still a teenager. So learning from them, I kind of understood that it was important to start. And it was enough to get me started to invest at some point, even though I already procrastinated on that for many years. But then even when I did start, I did not start at full speed. And now that I look back, I think the reason for that is that others have told me that investing is important was just not a strong reason for me. So in that time, I dabbled. I did invest, but not nearly as much as I could have. And for me, it wasn't actually until I actively asked myself, okay, what do I want my life to look like in a broader picture, like 10 years from now, that I actually became aware of, I do want to lead a certain lifestyle. I do want flexibility in my job. I also don't want to be dependent just from one job. And only after I figured out what I actually value in my life, that was when financial freedom and investing as a part of financial freedom fitted in the bigger picture. And then I had a very strong reason. So then I went full speed because the way I see it, a strong reason also leads to specific goals, and specific goals lead to action, to massive action, if you will. And that in the end is what gets the job done. Another consequence that came out of that not having a strong reason was my mistake number 3, and that was not investing early enough. Because I didn't have that strong connection between investing and what I want my life to look like, I started way too late. I procrastinated on investing for years because I was overwhelmed and I also didn't really have a reason to get unoverwhelmed, at least not earlier as I actually did. And that was a mistake because time is such an important factor in building wealth and in investing. Because when you have time on your side by starting as early as possible, then you can easily compensate, for example, with lower contributions. This is because of the way of how compound interest works. And when I now think back, I could have easily started 10 years earlier or even more than that. And that is a lot of money to miss out on. Let's just look at one quick example so you can visualize that better. If I had started with, let's say, $100 a month at the age of 20, then after 20 years, at an interest rate, I usually calculate with an interest rate of 6% per year, which for the stock market is relatively conservative. And then after 20 years, so at the age of 40, I would have ended up with $44,142.71. But if I had waited 10 years longer, so I would start at the age of 30 and still invest the $100 per month, then after 10 years, so also at the age of 40, then I would end up with $15,816.95. So that is only a third of what I could have had when I started a decade earlier. So whenever you're watching this, please don't underestimate time. My mistake number 4 was not protecting the downside. Now, what do I mean by the downside? For me, the downside from a personal finance perspective is costs that can come up in certain situations. So costs that can hurt us financially, like big time. One example would be that I did not have an emergency fund when I started to invest. Now, fortunately for me, in that time, nothing happened that would have required money. And even if I could have sold some of my investments to cover for unexpected expenses, but if at particularly this time, the market would have been down and I would have had to sell those investments for a lower price than I bought them for, then I would have lost money. And the way I see it, to limit the ways in which you can lose money is to have the emergency fund because it's protecting us from unexpected expenses. It's also to have the necessary insurances because the type of costs that insurances cover, these can be costs that exceed our income and or our financial capacity by far. So having the necessary insurances that really can bankrupt us is definitely one way to limit the downside. And in a way, I would also count debt or not having debt into limiting the downside. And that is because debt accumulates through the interest rate that you have to pay on that debt. And when your debt is not in control, that is definitely a downside too. By the way, I condensed all the things that I consider to limit your downside into a checklist. It's at the same time what I call your first step to wealth, which is financial security. So I have a checklist for the 6 essentials to financial security. If you want to check it out, there's a link down below. And my mistake number 5 was not putting as much into my investments as I could have. And I guess this one is also a bit tied to the missing strong reason. Because when I dabbled, because I did not have a strong reason, I did not just delay investing, so start later than I could have. I also, in a way, dabbled with how much I put in. So I did not invest as much as I could have at the time. And that was definitely also one thing that if I had, I would be way farther now than I am with my net worth. Because later on my financial journey, when I figured it all out, I did put more and more towards my investments. And that was when I really started seeing growth. Because besides time that we already talked about, our principle, so how much money we actually invest, is also an important factor in compound interest and what actually turns your money into more money. And that is why I highly recommend, if you are, for example, still stuck at the amount that you started to invest maybe a few months ago or maybe even a few years ago, find ways to increase those contributions, especially if you really want to grow your wealth fast. If you need some inspiration where you could maybe free up that money, then you can check out this video next. Those were my 5 most costly money mistakes. I hope you learned from them and thank you for watching if you're still here. And until next time, bye-bye.